There you go. I think that's it.
Cool. I think we're live. Cool.
Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to our presentation today. My name is Cameron Raw. I'm a software craftsperson at Codurance here. I will be the moderator for the session, and I'll be here to help collect any questions or comments of interest that might happen during the presentation so that we can organize them and I can try to present them as best I can to Matthias when the opportunity presents itself. Today's session will be about testing anti-patterns. For us at Codurance, we're sure a lot of you, TDD is a big part of what we do every day, and it really drives the features that we implement for our clients all the time. It's a very important part of our process. And as you probably know, there's a big consensus on TDD. Everyone's very happy with it. People who are enthusiastic about it understand the benefits and the importance of it. But there isn't really so much of a consensus for testing anti-patterns. So today what we'll be doing is we'll hopefully be covering some ground on those anti-patterns and discuss those topics in detail so we can get into the guts of that. Also, Matthias has collected some information on TDD in general. So have a vague look at what some people's backgrounds are like regarding TDD. There are some very surprising results considering how important it is to what we do. A lot of people say that, well, overwhelmingly, the majority of people that answered the survey said that they had to learn TDD by themselves rather than through their workplace. In fact, yes, it is very overwhelming. Everyone's had to teach it themselves. So it looks like it's a lot of, it's still something that hasn't been picked up by sort of the corporate landscape, as it seems. It seems to be more people who are passionate about development and doing things properly, but it seems to come out of a genuine desire to work that way, which is a very interesting point. And then we can start looking into why maybe corporations or why some businesses still haven't picked it up and see how they perceive TDD and what they think TDD means to them as a business and maybe why they haven't decided to pick it up yet. And we do have, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, just to interrupt, which is interesting. I would say like, if not TDD, I think the next survey would be what then? Like,
yeah,
if not TDD, what then? I think that's the key point. Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of building features and hoping that they do well, I guess, would be the immediate alternative I've had to work with in the past. I know that
Fingers
before
crossed. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, not everyone is doing it as part of their daily work. At least there's a pretty decent, I would say, maybe a third roughly of people that have responded, say, for the user at work, which seems when companies want stability out of their systems, it seems like a strangely small number of people, I think. So yeah, so there's a lot of things here, and I think besides talking about the anti-patterns in TDD, we might be able to go a bit deeper. I'll maybe ask a few questions to our audience about why their companies that they work at might not want to do it. Really, things like a lot of companies probably think that it will take a lot longer for their project to be finished or to be a minimum viable product or to make the changes that they need to see, and we can maybe tackle some of those conceptions that people have about TDD later on during the session.
That sounds good.
I think so. Great. Okay. Well, if we're all happy with that, then I'll pass it over to you, Matthias. And
let me share my screen. Sure. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
Yep, I can see that.
If that's good, if that's not. So, okay, let's do this. So be reminded that from now on, I can't see the chat. So.
Okay, cool. I'll keep an eye out for it.
That's nice. Okay. So yeah, let's get started. So thanks, Cameron, for the introduction. And let's get started. So, and thanks for everyone that has joined the session. So just before I started to dive into the talk subject, I'd like just to give you a brief introduction. And before that, if you guys want to know where to find me, usually I'm writing things about anything related to tech on my blog, and also on Twitter. You can find me there as well. And as you might notice, I'm a craft person at Codurance, and so far so good as camera. So far so good. I'm enjoying the ride, and if you want, and if you are interested, we are also hiring. So check out the Codurance.com careers page. Um, and let's see. So the agenda for today, I just prepared this a little bit just to get everyone on the same page. So the goal here is not to go uh, on all the anti patterns that I would like to. First, because there is no time for that today, and second, I think could be really boring for everyone to spend some that much time with me. So for the session today, we are going to focus on those four: the excessive setup, the layer, the giant, the slowpoke. And before that, in the end, we will have a wrapping up part. And then before that, I will just do a little bit of a intro about the subject and the motivations behind that. So yeah, so if there is nothing else to do, let's get started with the warm up with the background and why I chose this specific subject. So TDD, as Cameron said, TDD is part of our daily work at Codurance and our clients as well. And TDD, specifically not TDD, but testing in general for me has always been a subject of interest. So since I started my career, we did a joke before that, like if people is not doing TDD or testing, what they are doing, like crossing fingers and hope that things work out. And I think this is part of my interest in testing because for me it's kind of, how can I say, not magic, but kind of this safety net, something that we can do to provide us fast feedback and keep improving on top of that. And as a follow up of that, or just my reflections or things that I was thinking about testing in general, TDD, what I did, things that I achieved. Um, I just shared that on my blog. And then I saw that, to summarize, I think for the last 5 years, I would say, for the last 5 years, I try to keep that this practice, to keep it this pushing the test first approach. And it was interesting because it was the first time that I stopped to reflect and think about this approach, which is still for me is kind of interesting because, as Cameron said in the survey, there are some data that still there are companies that do not practice the test, or they are not willing to. They don't know the cause and pros around this technique, which is interesting. But yeah, that's what I heard. And then moving forward a little bit, I saw this video by Dave Farley. You might know him. He wrote a few books around continuous delivery, continuous integration. Even this channel, I think, is continuous delivery, if I'm not mistaken. Um, he goes and describe a little bit what this session is about today. So he started with a bit more of patterns. I think he goes over four. I don't know. I don't recall how many, but he goes over the patterns, and it's like a little bit more high level, I would say. And here the proposal is to go a little bit with code snippets and so on. He also shows code snippets and stuff like that, but there are a few things that could be improved. So this, if you haven't watched it, so this is really nice to good place. Besides that, another inspiration was the TDT Conf. Probably I see Clement here. Probably there are more folks around that talk. and attended this first international conference, which is a really win, I think, for the industry, for the community as a whole, because it shows the value and how the industry is moving forward towards like this quality measure, not just pushing code and crossing the fingers and hope everything goes well, right? So all the talks are available. This week, we also release a blog post around that, just to summarize some ideas around all the talks. So this is a good place to have a look and see how it goes as well. And then I would like to just to give a list for you to have a look. This list of the anti patterns that we're going to talk about today. Um, this is the list that Dave used on his talk, and I'm using here. And this is not the exhaustive list. So in total, we have 22. This is the list that I use for the survey as well. But there are 22. This is so we understand that there are 22. But today we are going to talk, as previously mentioned, about four: the layer, the giant, the excessive setup, and the slowpoke. And if you see a number, probably you're seeing the number around those anti patterns, and those numbers are the rank of each anti pattern on the survey. So I choose specifically that because they are not popular among the people that fill in the survey. So I thought that would be a good idea to share more more things around those instead of the most popular, because the most popular people already know, right? So that's what is those numbers about. And then before we jump in, this is also I would recommend to watch this Yegor Bugayenko talk. Lecture is more a lecture on the at the Napolis University, which he mentioned the anti patterns as well. But this is interesting because he mentioned 23 anti patterns instead of 22, which is interesting. There is one more, which is interesting. And he also points to an interesting, let's say, factor understanding. And we don't have like a consensus or where to the final reference for the anti patterns. For example, for patterns, we know the Gang of Four, right? So everyone that talks about patterns probably at some point we say, look, this is the Gang of Four book, so you should read it. But for the anti patterns, we don't have this still for testing anti patterns, which is interesting. That points this mismatch between those. So, but I highly recommend, anyways, to have a look at this one. And before diving to the first anti pattern, as Cameron mentioned in the introduction section, this is the first slide, the first question on the survey, and it shows that developers they learn TDD, or they learn how to test code or beat TDD. I would assume also other strategies, not by let's say official manner. Let's say it's like something willing to improve their skills or to get better at. So this shows up that developers are like learn TDD through books, through videos and courses, tutorials or whatever. And also there is a second question that is that if people that I work with already knew TDD or know TDD, and for my surprise, majority of the answers for the survey says that don't know. They don't know if it's true or not. But that will say that they disagree. So probably the people that they worked with don't know TDD, um, which makes me think that this is a good talk, like to follow up on this subject, because there is some gap. between people that want to learn, that learn by itself, like I want to learn, but also there are some gap in the industry or whatever it might be that we don't know if our peers know TDD or not. So that's interesting. And also, I think could be a source of the anti patterns that we're going to show up uh, here as well. This is like the normal learning curve, right? Before you learn something, you might make mistakes, and that's totally fine. And then we can it shows up in the form of anti pattern, which is interesting. So okay, so that's the interesting part. So without further ado, let's get started with the first one. So the first one is really interesting because it was the third most popular on the survey, and the excessive setup is anti-pattern that requires a lot of work um, to just start writing the test. So, for example, imagine that you want to test some class or some code, and it requires a lot of setup. And the excessive setup is exactly that. So it seems that's not so popular. But here, I would like to bring an example from a really famous framework, let's say. Uh, for those who in the audience that know Vue, probably know the next. And before we dive into, this is no blame. This is just an example. Don't take all the examples that I am showing here as a bad thing. This is those are just examples to uh, like an example to depict the anti pattern, but they are not. Let's say no. We are not blaming them in any means. So the excessive setup is like when you need to do a lot of work to test just a little bit of code, right? So this is the first example, and as I was saying, the Next.js is a framework that builds on top of Vue.js to offer server-side rendering applications. So it makes possible to server-side view applications and then push to the client like the HTML to serve the client's HTML or CSS or whatever. And then here, for those of you that are more interested in the source code, for each anti-pattern, I linked the GitHub repo to the specific file. So here, when we come to this Next.js server, so this is the first lines after the imports. We see this mock, which might think that could be to another anti-pattern, but this is just the setup that we need to do in order to start testing. So for example, after all those mocks, which is like mocking all the dependencies, we still have some mocks inside here, like to assert a few things. And then once we have these mocks and we do the assertions, we set up some spice. We also do some expectations on the middlewares or how to serve stacked content and stuff like that. So here, so if you notice, we have like 10, 12, I don't know how many mocks. And here we are building up what are the expectations for those mocks, right? And this is, I had to cut a little bit the code because it was really, really big. So, but keep in mind that this is just the minimum required to write the test for this. Server. And then once we get to the first test case, we get this test, right? We create the next application, and then the test is just this little bit, this little piece of code here. So for this excessive setup, this is an indication that we are doing a lot of work to start writing the tests, right? And I had to hide some piece of code to fit in this slide. So, but I think this gives a little bit of an idea of this pattern. The second one that goes along the excessive setup is a personal, let's say, project that is open source as well. and that aims to teach testing, unit testing. And this application is a gamified one. This is a gamified application that this piece of code that I'm going to show is related to um, this part, the editor. Um, this application is like any, if you might know HackerRank or Codelit or any of those that have some codes, you write some tests, and then you see if you uh, can go to the next level or not. This application is exactly that. And there is a specific piece of code in this open source project that is the code that handles the complexity to read the code from both editors and make them to read them, to parse them, and see if the code is correct and if it attends the expected behavior. And this code, let's say this wrapper that understand is the glue between the editors and the user interaction, has at least 10 dependencies. So, for example, in order to test this behavior, you would need to pass in all of these dependencies, not dependencies, but parameters. Like you have to set up prior to that all those dependencies just to get to get you start this testing. Um, and then once you pass in all the dependencies, you have this test case that's really small. It's just asserting that you can pass in the editor parameters, which means that this is a indication that we are doing a massive setup just to start asserting some things here. Actually, just two assertions. So this is an indication on the excessive setup as well, right? This is the beat that's interested. This is the assert, and then you have this test case, right? Not only that, I'm going to pick up the Jenkins. The Jenkins is used by Dave as well on his talk, which I think it might be worth to share here as well. And the first thing, this is from the Jenkins itself, the code in Java. And here, the next example is in Java. The previous one is was in JavaScript, but this one is in Java. And here, the argument is that the test just want to assert that a warning is shown if the application is on localhost, right? But if we have a close look at this, we see that we are creating a web client, going to this configure page, then performing some actions to set the URL for some specific configuration. And after that, we assert if we see the warning. But here, um, from the excessive setup point of view, we are instantiating a web client just to assert uh, for warning show, which leads to something that probably why you might need a web client, right, to do something like that. But still, I think is a valid argument depending on the test suite. So for me, all the examples that I showed, I try to enumerate at least three root cause that I can come with for the excessive setup to see this anti-pattern on the code base. The first one is to test after the source code, um, because, for example, in the first and the second example, when you have many dependencies, it's easier to go into this path if you're not testing first, uh, because you're just adding functionalities or dependencies and keep running, keep going with the application. The second one, I would say that the solid principles also apply, and they are connected with the object calisthenics. If we go back to the how it's called the second example, where there are many parameters, there is the object calisthenics says to use only two instances per dependencies, max 2 dependencies per class. And we are using like, I don't know how many in the second example, more than 10. So this could be some indications for why the excessive setup arises. Probably there are many more, but for those examples, I think these three are the main root cause. Next up is one of my favorites, the liar. Um, I don't know if people has some questions or something like that. Just let me know, Cameron, or it's not okay. We'll
Yeah,
just yep.
yeah, keeping an eye out at the moment. So if anyone does feel like they have any
Mm.
questions, don't feel shy. Do let us know.
Okay.
We're keeping an eye on it and
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
make
Nice.
sure they're
So
answered.
let's. Okay. Thanks. So let's keep going. So the layer is one of my favorites because the layer is the one that you say there is a test. You see, oh, there is a test in this code base, so you feel pretty comfortable making changes. And then when you start to work on, you see that there are some things that are not correct. So, for instance, if we see the next example, which is from the JavaScript again, which is really common, the layer pattern in the JavaScript code bases, because JavaScript by nature is async, right? And Jest, which is the framework for JavaScript testing, one of the frameworks for testing, it starts the documentation say, look, be careful with callbacks and promises because they are async. So this is the first example that they reference in the documentation. You have a callback that expects something to happen once this fetch data is fired. So we have fetch data that you compute something, and once this computes, we do the assert and the expect here, right? And that's not correct. And why this test is not correct? And this test is a classic is a liar, let's say, because for Jest, you have to hook into the life cycle of the test, which is done by this done keyword, this parameter that just injects by the the parameter, this uh, done here, and then you as a programmer, once you have this in the callback, you say, okay, I have this done, and then now I have control over this callback, so I will inform when this callback will be done. So, for example, um, the previous test would always pass, regardless of what you do. The callback would always pass because this is not how to say it's not asserting, it's not ending the just execution and then assert. Whereas this test will just wait for you as a programmer to say, look, I'm done. And if you pass in a variable done without any parameters, it's a success test. Otherwise, it's an error. So the test will fail. So this is the classic example of the JavaScript. So I will leave you just with that because I'm switching off a bunch of the programming languages, but that you go.
We've actually got some questions,
Yeah,
or
go
at
ahead.
least
Go ahead.
conversational points that maybe we can comment
Go,
on as well.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So we've got a question from Jesus, who's asking if you know of any book or resource where we can check all of the 22 anti-patterns.
That's actually a good question. Um, and for the time being, I don't know a specific book. There is the X Unit book that is for general purpose, but it's not for anti patterns. As far as I know, there are no books like official books just for anti patterns. There are links to code smells, X Unit patterns, but just for anti patterns is not. There isn't.
Okay,
So
so that's the question. We've
uh,
also got quite a healthy conversation going on about some of the points in the previous chapter with
okay.
possibly weak cohesion. We've got a point here from Rafael where it's weak cohesion indicates that SRP could be violated, which is why there's such an extensive amount of dependencies as well.
Correct. Correct.
Seems like a good point. Um, and yeah, and I think we've got a few other people sort of echoing the same point as well. Calisthenics,
Calisthenics.
do
Yeah, there
something.
you
Yeah,
go. That's solid. Yeah. And
yeah,
also the test
and
first. Yeah.
hmm
If you're not
and
doing
if you've
test
got
first.
and sort of along the same line as well, we've got Javier has mentioned that excessive dependency mocking leads to poorly designed code
And
anyway.
by yeah, and by the way, the mockery. I'm not bringing here the mockery and the hiding dependency anti pattern because it seems that they are pretty famous. So it seems that people already know a lot of those anti patterns based on the
hmm
survey. So
hmm
that's why I'm not bringing them here. But good points. Good points on the chat. I agree with them as well.
Great. Well, keep them coming.
Okay, so thanks, Cameron. So yeah, so I'm just I just leave the meme here because it's always nice. But the layer lies not only the JavaScript, right? The layer lies in different code bases. So, for example, here there is a Kotlin code, a test code, and I will leave 10 seconds for the audience to spot what's wrong with this test here. Talking about the layer, 10 seconds. If any guess, I forgot that I can't see the chat, but
We do have a first guess that's come through. Missing assertions, which was suggested by Juan Blanco.
there you go, there you go. There you go, there you go. That's the layer as well, and we have this pattern repeating as well here. So it's just point of attentions, right? Just point of attentions. There is no
Mhm.
assertion. There is no assertion. Even though we have like this potential triple A pattern of writing tests, there are no assertions. That's nice catch. Um, so the layer, first foremost, watch out for async programming languages and not for just JavaScript, for any, and also test without assertions. And there is one more that I would like to add that I forgot, which is the test description misleading. Because, for example, sometimes you read the test and you say, this is testing how to update a user. And then once you go to the code, you see that this is doing something totally different. The test code is doing something totally different. So this is the third point of attention as well. And as always, this for me, in my opinion, this is like not practicing TDD, like test first, and also oriented to coverage. Because when you're in a hurry, you always want to go and write some tests just to hit lines, right? Hit, get coverage, and that's it. So those are the main root causes for this one. And the giant. Let's go to the giant. Um, any others, or I can keep going.
We've got another point here about why test coverage isn't necessarily a great metric to use because you can have lots of coverage, but maybe your assertions have got something wrong with them.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe you've somehow missed all of your assertions and you actually got zero coverage. Um, so yeah, just another nice sort of observation from Rafal on that point.
That's a good observation. And I would like to suggest as well, what is a kata that's called rose guided, I think, guided
Oh,
rose,
gilded
guided,
rose. Yeah.
guided. Thanks, Herman. That, at least for me, is a classic example on how the coverage is usually useless, and at the same time, you can use coverage as like a guidance. But
Mhm.
as a metric, it's really tricky. It's really, really, really tricky. But yeah, good point. Good point. Thanks for information. So yeah, let's do the giant. The giant was one of the least voted in the survey. So it seems that people are not really familiar with the giant. But I would say that people are familiar with good God objects, right? Uh, if you worked in any code base that is a little bit, let's say, not old, but yeah, let's say old legacy, maybe you see like this class doing sending requests, consuming services, uploading files, storing to the database, sending SMS, doing everything, doing everything. But it can happen in the test code as well, which can become an anti-pattern. So, for example, this is an example from an open source project, but this time is in PHP. And I think this it depicts the source of the giant in the test code. So, for example, we have a class, a test class, which is okay, and then we have this test method, unit conversions. Um, for me, unit conversions. The first question that I have is which unit, right? From what to what? But for some reason, this is test conversions. And once we dive into a little bit of the code, uh, we see that there are a few values here, an array, which is fine. And then for each value that we have, we are doing a for each, which means that we are converting. We want to convert something based on a list, right? And then what happens is based on those values, we start converting. So in the same test case, we have this converter, CM to WIP. So converter, you have the value and the result that you want, and centimeters to inch. So you have centimeters to some another value that I don't know, and it keeps going, right? Centimeters to pixels. I don't know if CM stands for centimeters. By the way, I'm just assuming, and then it keeps going. It keeps going, like converter to point, a converter to emu, and it keeps going, right? It keeps going, and then um, it keeps going. It keeps going. The same, like asserting the value and an expected result, right? And then the question comes, hmm, what might be this one? Just one minute. By the way, I would like to the chat this is a good question for the chat. What do you guys think that might be a lead to the giant int pattern? That's a good question. I added this emoji two eyes just for that because it keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going.
Would you have a comment from Jose? It's like you so there's so much stuff there, you'll forget what you wanted to test
Yeah,
in the first place
there you
with
go.
what's going on.
And
I
by
I put
yep,
oh sorry. I was
go
just
go
going
go
to say
go.
from my just from my sort of observation on that as well. I really don't like logic happening within uh, the assertion as well because it doesn't feel very secure to me. If you miss one number or something, you're trying to assert against the wrong thing. So I'd say having too much logic in your test can be a
Correct,
bad
correct.
idea as well.
There you go, there you go. And
We've got.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to say we've got uh, test should have one reason to fail. We've got that coming from Khalid.
Yeah, that's a
So
good
yeah,
one.
just have a point there.
That's a good one. And by the way, hold on, because we keep going. It's not just that we keep going. I just extract it and keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And finally, we reach to the end. So I don't know. I think it was 12. I don't know, 15, almost 20. Um, I can't show up the entire code here in the slide. It would be a little bit odd, but exactly. The test should have one reason to fail. Also, for this kind of test, we have data providers, right? That's why you use data providers. So if you want to repeat a test with a subset of data, use a data provider. On the same lines as the one reason to test, to fail, sorry, there is the lack of feedback on this one. Because, for example, if you see this one to fail, which message would you get? How would you know that was the one that failed um, during the execution? It will lead you. It will not something like straightforward. Oh, okay, this is the line. So it will take a little bit more time to find out this out, right? And well, that's the giant. So if you see, there are other examples. So for example, I just did this assert, 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 but there are other patterns, as Dave on his talk says about uh, having a lot of code and then doing something, asserting, doing something, asserting, doing something, everything inside the same test. this is some indication that is the giant as well. And also this, for me at least, it leads me to the test after as well. So I have some code I need to test. I don't know what I just need to cover this, and there you go.
Got another
Yeah,
quick point
go ahead.
regarding in the giant. If you don't know which test is failing, we've got Jose's mentioned that you'll get the line for which test is failing, but the problem is you won't know about the tests after that failing test,
There
if
you
that
go.
makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah,
So
exactly.
if the
Yeah,
fifth test fails, then
you
you
do.
might be able
Yeah,
to find out that it's that one, but then 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, you won't know
correct. Yeah,
what's going on.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. There you go. There you go. There you go. Um, and then this is what I think that the data provider would help, because the data provider will say, look, with this subset of data, that this failed, and that would help. Nice. Okay, so this is the last one that we have for today, and one of my favorites as well. So if you haven't heard about the slowpoke, here you go. I highly recommend you, if you don't know Pokemon or you don't know slowpoke, I would highly recommend you to listen to this song. Just search for YouTube the slowpoke song, and you will never forget the slowpoke ant pattern, and also the song, the slowpoke song. Um, Unfortunately, I think I can't share my audio here, so you guys will have to bear with me to listen to this song. But uh, listen to this song after the talk. And here, before we dive into this, I would like to mention this and non-determinism in tests, because the slowpoke, for me, there are two main points for that. The first one is related to what Martin Fowler wrote in 2011, where he describes the async behavior that we saw already, and then he also describes the date, how to deal with date and time, right? Um, because async is a future promise, so it's something in future. It's not deterministic. You might have, or you might not. Dates, are something like are not deterministic for your test, because you don't have quote unquote control uh, over the hours. For example, if you're talking about date, which is the example that he shows on this article. Um, so for that, the slowpoke, those can be a reason for the slowpoke. And for that, to illustrate that, to depict the slowpoke when talking about async and time, I will come back to this example, but this time is not in the editor, but in this little buggy here. That is the guide. So the guide, there is a component on this open source project, and this component, the responsibility of this component is one, help the user give information, show or hide information based on the time, if something has passed or not, and also alert the user if something is wrong, right? So we have a bunch of different things around that. And to start with, we have this component, which is the guide, that represents this component. And here we have this expiration time. So for example, this is the expiration time. And when we deal with expiration time, this is what I refer to in the Martin Fowler article, because we want something to happen after a specific time. And here, specifically saying about 400 milliseconds. So I have this code that after 400 milliseconds, we want the guide to display another image, some information, right? And how would we test that? So the first approach would be in JavaScript, again, in JavaScript, but I can relate that to any other programming language, would be to define a time after the 400 milliseconds and execute the test that we want. So for example, that's what we exactly do here. So um, after 500 milliseconds, we execute some action in the test, right? So it will happen after uh, the 400 milliseconds, which allows us to assert as it should be. And here we are also skipping the layer, as we previously saw using this done uh, function from jest. But for example, after this 500 milliseconds, we assert we do all what the test needs. But here lies the non-determinism from what Martin Fowler was saying. So you might think, oh, 500 milliseconds is okay. I don't mind. So this sounds good to me. But what if it is 1 minute or 2 minutes or 10 minutes? So imagine you having to wait for something to execute for 2 minutes, 10 minutes. And not just only that, imagine you having to wait for this is just one test, but imagine that you have 10 tests, each of waiting 2 minutes. And then this builds on top of the slowpoke and not deterministic because uh, you don't control that. So this is one of the reasons that I mentioned, which I can relate to. Also, this is for the let's say quote unquote front end client applications, but I can relate that for backend applications, for example, for cron jobs, or for example, anything related to year, date time related, right? Because imagine that you have a routine and you want to test that just in the end of the month something happens. Would you execute your test suite and wait for the end of the month to come and then, oh no, this is something that I can't go over. And also on this article, Martin Fowler shows some examples on Java, like how to mock and to deal, how to control uh, the dating time in Java. And here in JavaScript, I would avoid this approach that set timeout, but instead I would use a jest, for example, run out timers or run only pending timers or advanced time because just allows you to go to the future, if you will, and then assert without having to wait for anything. So you can you can go move forward during your test executions. The second part, so this is the first thing. So non-deterministic and control and stuff like that. And the second part that I would like to relate this anti-pattern is related to the integration uh, part and also focusing on the coverage, as we already said in the beginning. So here, for example, the test containers. I'm not saying that's bad to use. I think you should use, um, but the key, the point here is if we are thinking about integration or more end-to-end tests, so you're going to use these test containers or whatever it might be, like Selenium to Cypress to create a web browser. But using that, you you are adding a complexity or some delay to complete your test. So then it might lead also to a slowpoke to having your test suite a little bit slower, leading to the slowpoke approach, right? So uh, this for me, when we see this pattern using more integration tests and leading, walking towards this slowpoke, I can relate that to trying to reverse engineer, let's say TDD, which is like to test less, and also along those lines, I can relate that with coverage. So we have a target, we need a target. So instead of going test first, I'm going to do the opposite and then focus on the integration where I can hit many lines as much as I can, and then follow up on that later, right? Um, and not only that, uh, with all these explanations, like this one, yeah, go ahead. Cameron. We have a question.
Yeah, so we've got a suggestion from Javier about it would be possible to avoid some of these problems by relying more on publishing and listening to events um, when we're dealing with time.
That's also good. That's also a good idea.
Hmm.
That's also a good idea. But I think the key point on this one would be to um, sometimes that you need to check for dates. For example, if you need to check for dates,
Hmm.
you might need to force to mock. Let's say this is a
Hmm.
good example of mocking because you want to mimic the date. You're not in that date yet, but you can mimic. But events, if this is not required, is also a good point, a good source of dealing with that.
Okay. And we have a question from Ikaro who's asking, how would you overcome inevitably slow tests? Would you put them in separate test suites?
Yeah, there are different strategies for that. But for example, let me let me do one thing, because this is, I think, we need more I think to think about and discuss,
Hmm.
because dealing with these load tests, I think it depends on the context. Because if you're talking some for a new project that you're starting fresh, um, we need to manage this bunch of tests. And then if you're starting for a project that already exists, I think the strategies are different. So for example, if you started from a project that already exists and you have too many tests and their integration and manual, you might have this ice cream cone, which is also an end pattern, right? You don't want this, because it means that you're having more slow tests, more integration, more UI tests, and less unit tests. What you might want on this would be um, to be like that. So much more unit tests, then a bit of integration tests, and then a little bit of automated tests. So I would say that I don't have a exactly hard amount. Let's say you should have like 10 unit tests, should have two integration tests. I don't have this, but I think there is a subjective. I don't have any, let's say, reference for that, but it's subjective, right? So I think it's easy to spot on your uh, on your code base where you see more integration tests than unit tests. So when you see that, you can try to reverse that automatically. When you have more than unit tests than the integration or UI tests.
Okay. Um, we've got a question
Yep.
from
Go ahead.
Julian or Julian, if I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Go ahead. Yep.
Is hitting the database an anti-pattern? As we're talking about integration tests.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think so, but depends on the context. I mean, always hitting. So, which kind of tests are we talking about? And I think
Uh,
this is my lead to the wrapping up, because in the end, there is something that might related to this question.
okay.
So I will come back to that later. Let's see if I don't forget. But this is a good question. Okay, so we are almost done. I see that there are two questions that we have to address, which is the database, and the other one I already forget, which is how to overcome a slow test base. Okay, so test suite. Okay, so we have those two to address, but be with me. So before we finish up, just a recap. We saw the layer, excessive setup, the giant, and the slowpoke. I bet that the slowpoke you never forget because of Pokemon. Just final considerations on this presentation. I think all of them, at least from my perception, this is like perception, pure perception. They are more oriented to test less. Perception because I wasn't there when people were writing the test. We can see the comment, but even though we can't see if it was testless or not. But it seems so. It points to. And one point here that was trying to think about is sometimes I myself I did that, right. Sometimes I said, "Oh, this is so hard to test. Oh my god, I just want to have this done," uh, which is not a good approach. But I myself I made that mistake in the past. But what I would say is that if it is hard to test, to take a step back and try uh, to reflect on why this is hard and how to make the it easy to test, and then follow up on what you have to do, right? Which a good source, at least for me, is this book, which is the specifically talking about the working skeleton. And the work skeleton for me goes as well with this database question, because on the work skeleton, Steve and Nat, they show up how to start with the skeleton, a scratch, uh, even with the server running like locally, and having that tested end to end, a XMPP protocol server running locally, and how to have this with tests. So, which might makes me think: is it okay to hit the database? I think so, depending on the test that you might want, but not for all your tests, right? Not all your tests. Following the same approach here that they use XMPP server to communicate to see how it goes, right? So this is something that if it's hard to test or if you're stuck, this I think is a good resource to get on and read. And last but not least, I would highly recommend this post for Codurance that gathers some podcasts. I don't know if JM is here, if Jose is here, or people that are involved in this content, which is awesome. So I would recommend that as a follow up after this talk, because it can bring more insights and more things that might want to double check. Um, and basically, that's it. Besides that, all the posts at Codurance are also good. But besides that, I think that's it. Uh, for me, Cameron, I don't know if you have questions. I don't know if I answered the database, or if not, I can try to think about the testing, how to overcome a slow test suite.
Do you have a suggestion from Fernando on that about infrastructure tests? And further to that, we've got a question from Manuel about: do you believe you can replace a pyramid with integration such end-to-end tests with full coverage with unit tests and snapshot tests and contract tests?
I can you repeat the question, please? Let me see if I
Do you
answer.
believe you can replace a pyramid with integration or end-to-end tests with full coverage of unit tests and snapshot tests and contract tests? It's quite a big question.
I think let's see. I don't think that you can replace because I think you with this approach you might want to test different things, right? Because
Mhm.
for example, a snapshot, as far as I know, we might want to test something more on the, let's say, visual side of things.
Mhm.
In the contract, you might want to test that more on the uh, let's say services layer kind of thing, on the communication of application and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So I think can we replace? I don't have the answer, but right now I would say that you might need both, and not just one. Everything for one and everything for another. You might want uh, to use both approaches.
Great. Okay. And since that, all the messages in the chat have just been saying thanks and congratulating you on a good presentation. So, yeah, looks like that's done. Unless
There it
everyone has any
goes.
quick questions they'd like to throw in at the end. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'll keep an eye out for any more questions as we wrap up. So if we do see anything come through in time, then we'll certainly see if Matthias has got an answer for you. But in the meantime, sorry, Matthias, did you want to say something?
no. Go ahead. I just was thinking about this how to overcome a slow test. We have a bunch of strategies. So the first one is to tag the slow tests, see why they are
Mhm.
slow, try to refactor them, and replace them bit by bit. Uh, and what else? Yeah, so avoiding hitting, for example, in a slow test scenario that you are hitting always the database. Probably you don't need always to hit the database. Uh, you probably want some of the tests hit the database, but other ones you
Mhm.
can like replace your real database for a memory one or
Mhm.
repository if you're using repository pattern, um, and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
I think that's it. I think I think that's a good approach to start like that.
Yeah, we're using a in-memory one in the current project I'm working on. It makes life a lot easier. Um, we've got if anyone would like to see it, we've got a post from the Kima class or Kema class. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. A post there that's going to have TDD for newbies and experts alike. If anyone wants to check the chat for that. We've got some mention of mutation tests as a way to test your tests. Would you recommend teaching testing during the formative period of an engineer, or would you focus on other topics first? Which is a good question. So I've got someone, a friend of mine, who's learning how to code for the first time, and I'm very excited personally to get tests in there very quickly, because not just because tests are important, but I think it encourages a very good mindset from day one. And I kind of wish that I had taken that approach when I first started doing it as well. But what would you think about that?
I don't know. I don't have any. I'm not against that. Isn't for, I think we. I think that I don't see any problem
Mm,
testing for new joiners formative period. I will give an example. I know that Anish that um, he is a famous author in Brazil. He's a teacher as well, a researcher on that area, and he teaches tests for his students. And as far as I can see the results. They are good, very good. So
mhm,
there is no, let's say, don't do that. I think it's
mhm,
the opposite, because if I think about that now, for example, building the post that I commented about Codurance, the last link, building a testing culture, right?
mhm.
So if we think about the culture and testing, I think the earlier the better.
Yeah.
But I have my questions around the cognitive load on the person, right?
Mhm,
Because it has to learn to code, not just that, it has to learn also to test, and that's just the test is the patterns or the
mhm.
frameworks that are. So I have some questions on the cognitive load on the side of things.
That's a good point as well. Yeah. Cool. Okay. We've just had from our team enter a link for our next one, our next event about testing. So please do have a look at that for our next Livestorm event to discuss that. And aside from that, just like to thank Mateus for an excellent presentation, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming to watch as well. I hope that you've learned something from it. I know that I certainly have. And yes, thanks very much for watching. I hope to host you guys again sometime soon.
So
Great.
thank you, and thanks for the amazing facilitation, Cameron. So talk to you guys later as well.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Everyone have a good
Bye.
evening.